community was everything when we were dealing with HIV, because we only had each other. You know, the outside world were not concerned with us and were scared of us. And I always say that those times were the best of times and the worst of times, because the worst part was that we were seeing our friends die. The best part was the amazing amount of support system that existed back then. The first thing you saw was a lot of for rent signs, because people were dying. So there was a lot of vacancies. You'd walk down Castro Street in San Francisco and you'd see people in wheelchairs, and you could tell. There was a thing called the look, you know, and so you kind of could tell the ones that people were, you know, progressing in the disease. I went to a lot of memorials. And I actually love memorials. I became very good at them because I would do, you know, memorial after memorial. When somebody would die, I would want to have sex even more, because the opposite of being around all that death was desire. So I continue to have a lot of sex. Well, the community started to come together, I would say 83, 84. There was a whole group of lesbian separatists that was very big. The gay guys were cruising on Castro Street and the lesbians were, you know, in their own world. And as the threat of the disease happened, the lesbians really came to our aid and started taking care of the gay guys. And I always have a posit that if it was the other way around, and if it was lesbians that were getting it, we would not have taken care of them. So they were real saints as far as I'm concerned. The test didn't come out till 1985. I was one of the first people. I went the first day to get tested. It was at the Harvey Milk School, and I had a boyfriend then, and he was like insistent that we get tested, and he's like, no matter what, we'll be together, right? And so we got tested. He was negative, I was positive, and he left me the next day. So then I had to deal with being positive. And back then, as you probably know, it was kind of a death sentence. And it's like the wheel of misfortune, spinning and spinning and spinning, and like thinking it's gonna land on you. And you know, and every little dot or whatever, I was just convinced that it was KS. So it was a really scary time. And I kind of lived behind drawn curtains and shades for a year and was like really depressed about it. Well, in 1986, I was kind of getting used to being positive, and I had a friend named Chuck Solomon, and he was one of the founders of Theater Rhinoceros, which was the gay theater in San Francisco. He was diagnosed with HIV. His brother had just died, and his lover had just died. And we loved him dearly, and he was turning 40. And so he wanted to have a birthday party, and I'm like, well, why don't we have the birthday party, but make it a celebration of your life, because there have been so many memorials of people that had died, and they weren't there to see it. So there were like 300 people that came. It was a huge event. Also, it was really controversial because I would say 3/4 of people thought it was morbid, you know, and didn't want to do it, you know. And I really pushed for this to happen, you know, for it to be, and Chuck was completely on board. So about, I would say 2 weeks before that, I decided that we should make a documentary about it. I made the documentary in 4 months, record time, because my goal was to make it so that Chuck could see it before he died. It premiered at Frameline. Chuck sat next to me and cried like a baby. He was very moved. And it just took off after that. It was the first generation of AIDS films. I kept myself alive by just pure will. And luckily, after I did the movie, I had a lot better attitude toward things. I mean, I was still frightened to death that I was gonna die. it made us really conscious of life and death. And I chose life instead of death. And then in 1989, there was a AZT trial. And so I did that. And I had no side effects. I mean, people talk about how horrible it was, and it wasn't horrible to me. I don't know when the first antivirals combinations happened. I think it was probably the mid-90s. You know, I went on those right away. And they were miracles because, you know, you'd see people with KS and all of a sudden they didn't have KS. You know, and KS was really the worst. In 1993, I made a documentary called Sex Is, and there were 13 people in it. It was, the subtitle was The Meaning of Sex and Sexuality in the Gay Community. And I had a lesbian editor named Ragnhildur Gunnarsdóttir, who was Icelandic, and she wanted to put more sex in the movie. She's like, this is called Sex Is, there must be sex in this movie. I'm like, no, no, no. So she put all this sex in it, and I'm like, oh, well, okay. It was part of what we were talking about, and a crucial part of what the film was about. And it was a huge hit. It showed in Berlin again. We won Best Film, but it showed, I think, in 60 cities in America. We broke box office records at the Castro. It was really widely embraced by, you know, a community of gay people. I thrived on community, and I think the community part gave me energy to make my movies. That was my passion, you know, and, you know, again, I look at that time as being the best time of my life, where I was actually contributing something. So that's how I dealt with it. I mean, everybody dealt with it in different ways. I did go to demonstrations too, because I was a political person, but that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was doing my art. There's a quote that Carrie Fisher had, and she said, take your broken heart and make it into art. And I love that quote, because that's what I'm doing. Well, I do think that we are forgotten in certain ways, but that's okay. You know, when I was 20, I didn't care about the history of older gay guys, you know, and they had to deal with, you know, being arrested or, you know, living in the closet or getting married because that was the only thing that they could do. So I get it. Kids will be kids. So, and I do know, you know, a fair amount of HIV people that are angry and upset and think nobody cares what we went through, and you know, that's just the way it is. You know, like people that have survived the Holocaust, you know, they're in movies and stuff, but I'm sure that when they talk about it, people don't want to hear it. So, you know, I've come to a conclusion that it's okay. I don't feel any anger about that.